We're talking about Nelson Mandela today, and we have Jeff Koinange with us, who will be giving us his personal reflections on the great Nelson Mandela. Right, and so Jeff Koinange is one very, very fortunate man to have met him not once, not twice, several times.
Numerous times.
Indeed.
I feel so honored, fortunate, privileged, you name it.
Yeah.
Because it's what everyone would have wanted to do. Everyone
That's
I knew wanted to be in the, not just in his presence, just to meet him, talk to him, ask him a question.
You know, Oprah Winfrey said it's magical, and you know, he has this magical, majestic, graceful presence. Tell us about the first time you met Nelson Mandela.
Yeah, it was in Burkina Faso, in Ouagadougou, in what was then the Organization of African Unity, OAU summit. And he showed up. He was president then, was back in 1997. He showed up, and you know, of course, we were all excited. And while we were waiting for other presidents to come, you know, he was so engaging with the press. There was a whole bunch of us, and we said, "Listen, Mr. President, can we ask you a couple of questions?" He said, "Oh, no problem. Oh, yeah." And of course, we went ahead and we asked the questions, and he looked at me, and when I asked my question, he looked at me and said, "Where are you from, young man?" And I said, "I'm from Kenya. My name is Jeff Koinange." He says, "Koinange? Ah, I knew a Koinange once. You must be the son of chiefs. You must be." And I, you know, explained my heritage and all that. And you know, since that day, we developed this rapport. He was so friendly.
It was very easy to develop this rapport with him.
Goodness, what a man! I mean, incredible. He was in his presence. You just felt at peace, and you know, you felt you were the only one in the room when he talked to you. So subsequently, other times when I met him, he would see me in a room full of journalists, and he would come, whether with a head of state or whether he was making a statement, and he would say, "Koinange, you're here again." And you know, boom, and people would laugh, or you'd crack a joke, and then the questions would start. So he had that way of just breaking the ice and making everybody seem comfortable.
And you not only had the opportunity to meet him, your family did as well. And you know, we have that iconic picture of Nelson Mandela, and you know, you and your son and your wife. It's absolutely amazing. How did you break the news to your son? I know we're talking about that just a short while ago.
That was the toughest part, because I heard the news on Thursday night, late at night, about 11 o'clock Kenya time. And of course, my son was asleep because the next day he was going to school early. So I figured, you know, when he wakes up in the morning, I'm going to have to break this news before somebody tells him at school. And I brought him upstairs, I sat him down, and I said, "Listen, young man, Tata Madiba has gone, he's left us." He says, Gone where? Left us where? And I said, he died last night. And he says, No, he can't. This is a dark day. This is a terrible day.
Wow.
Why did he die? And then he asked me, "When are we going to meet him?"
Oh, okay.
I said, you know, I said, "No time soon, I hope."
Right.
But he was very disturbed. He was extremely disturbed. And each day, you know, he keeps seeing all these profiles and pictures and everything. And I keep telling him, "Yeah, Tata Madiba is gone, but he'll always be with us."
When we take a look at, you know, his profile and his life, and I know, of course, everybody's thinking now, what next in the aftermath? You know, you've been in South Africa for a while. You've met Nelson Mandela. Talk to us about, you know, what happens to all of these citizens who are now orphaned as a result of Tata passing on. The ANC and its future. You know, I found it interesting that, in fact, one of his first major assignments within the ANC was he was the founder of the youth movement, which, you know, Julius Malema took over, and we know where that's going. But let's just talk about what happens now and how people move on.
Yeah, Yvonne, the best thing about what happened to him now was that he prepared not just the nation or the continent, he prepared the world for his death. All those hospital visits before, and you know, the last one in June was for a couple of months. I mean, he was there for a while. He was slowly preparing us, because had he died suddenly, it would have been a shock. I mean, this world would still be numbed by his death. So now he prepared us slowly, and he prepared the nation. It was, you know, they had rehearsed, if you will, his death for months. And that's why the transition is so smooth. He was the glue that held the nation together while he was alive. he will be the glue. Yes, they have elections coming up in the early part of the year, and it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. But for now, you know, all the panic, all the naysayers and the pessimists who were saying things are going to break down, there's going to be civil war, there's going to be white flight, none of that will happen.
And interesting, even as you mentioned, no panic. I mean, when his death was announced, it was grief and happiness
and celebration
all at the same time.
Incredible.
Interesting, isn't it?
Incredible. No people wearing black, no people openly mourning or wailing. They were toy-toying in the streets. They were dancing, they were jubilating, just like they did in the 60s. And you know, it was incredible. The people have been ready, have been preparing for this moment, and the way they are reacting and responding, it just shows it's a mature country,
it's
mature people, and Nelson Mandela prepared their country for this.
Indeed. Let's move to, did you ever see him with Graca Machel?
Yes, many times.
Tell us about that relationship, getting married when he was 80.
I
mean,
know.
You know, a lot of people say she was his new lease on life.
Yes, she was. And it was what, late in 96, right? When they got married, and it was Zimbabwe. I think Robert Mugabe he was in the audience. But to see those two together, you could see that she had brought a breath of fresh air, a breath of life in his life. And he was like a little boy around her. I mean, he was so happy, and she made him happy, and she knew that this man had been so lonely for so many years, and he didn't have that much more time to go. And she kept him going. But the other amazing thing was Winnie Mandela. You know, yes, they separated. Yes, they went their separate ways. But towards the end, she was a big part of his last days.
That's
where they was in the hospital, and even in the house, she was present when he called the entire family on his deathbed. She was there. So she was his partner for life. But Graca, everybody knew she was also there. She played a role.
I read, you know, in his book that one of the regrets he had was his womanizing, you know, time in the 1940s or when he was in his 40s. But, you know, definitely none of that, you know, even comes out. And the fact that all of these women can now come together and say, you know, regardless of what happened, we're now one big family.
And then the other thing is, Winnie's just released a book earlier, a couple of months ago. It's called 491 Days. It's that time that she was in prison. And she went through hell, you know, for lack of a better word. When he was in prison for those 27 years, she was the face of the ANC. She was the face of Black South Africa. And she was harassed, and she was, you know, the white minority government, they made sure they gave her such a tough time, but she held firm. She raised those kids, and you know, when he came out, and you know, those kids finally got to meet their father after all that time. So she deserves a lot of credit.
After being away for 27 years, he would be, and justifiably so, Jeff, the most bitter person on the planet.
No doubt.
He had an axe to grind with just about everybody. But then he comes out and he says, no, we're not going to go the violent way. We're going to seek unity and unify the different ones. He could have been bitter.
Can you imagine? And look, here's one tiny little example. He goes to jail when he's 44 years old, 1964. 5 years later, his son is killed in a car crash.
That's right.
He asks the warden for permission to go for closure, you know, seek closure with his son, because he's just died and he hadn't seen him for 5 years. The warden rejects that request. One example. That's 5 years. 22 years later is when this man comes out. Family hardly knows him. He goes to hug his kids. They say, you're cold, you feel cold. Because they don't have that connection. Then he has this country. Everybody's looking up to him. For the next 2 years, between 91, 92, 93, the clashes with black on black.
Violence. Remember?
It was terrible in the townships, in the hostels. It was terrible. This one man they're all looking towards. Then he finally calls on the government. He says, call elections. They finally do it in 1993 for a year later, so April 27, 1994. And everybody's looking at one man to solve all their problems. So what does he do? He says, I am bigger than this nation. So he sacrifices his family and becomes the bigger man and leads this country throughout the 1994 elections. And he does this one term. But the one thing that you can't have everything. He couldn't do it all.
That's right.
And you know, in the family, obviously there was a bit of bitterness, but they understood.
Obviously, and like you say, you can't be, you know, one man to all people. There's a sacrifice that's got to be made. We want to conclude our discussion, Jeff, and for you, your personal reflections on the death of Nelson Mandela and what it should mean to everybody and how we should best celebrate that. I know there's been a lot of comparisons being made to certain African leaders and on the continent.
Yeah.
And
Forget about that.
Yes. Nothing too flattering, but how can we best celebrate this man whom you knew very well?
You were asking folks to tweet his best quotes, right? The one I remember the most was after he was elected president in 1994, when he, towards the end of his speech, he says, "Never has the sun set on such a glorious occasion."
Right.
Those words, never has the sun set. And this man, he's still riding into the sunset. He's going to be gone in body, but his spirit will always be present. And if we could do just one thing, and be just a tiny little bit like him, a fraction of what he was, this would be a much better place. It's all about country first, everything else second. At the end of the day, none of that other stuff matters. It's what you do for your country and your people that matters in the end.
Here's one last question. Do you think in our lifetime we'll see another man?
No, I know the question. No, not in ours. Not in ours. I mean, this man, it's...
Perhaps your son's lifetime?
I hope so.
Who got to know him very well?
Got to know him, yeah. And now, hopefully when he grows up, he'll be telling people, I met that great man. It's like Mahatma Gandhi back in the 30s and 40s, meeting Mahatma Gandhi back then, and he's still, huge today. He's still revered today. I hope my son can one day say, yes, I met the man, and and he was a great man, and I'd like to be like the man.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that.
Good to see you.
Jeff Koinange, thank you. Good to see you as well. And he has been here. Our bench moved here temporarily on checkpoint tonight. Sort of a checkpoint meets the bench.
That's
kind of
right.
thing,
Check bench. Oh my, one my.
Oh my. Jeff sharing his personal reflections of Nelson Mandela, and I hope you can continue to do the same and just make that more relevant. Keep your quotes coming in. We'll continue to share them throughout this live newscast as we celebrate the late, great Nelson Mandela.